We start with China and a story about the two biggest economies in the world trying to come to trade terms. Who has the upper hand? And is it possible for both to win?
President Trump wants to rebalance the American economy back to a manufacturing economy with high precision manufacturing. I think everyone agrees, including Chinese leadership, that they need to rebalance towards more of a consumption and consumer economy. And the dream scenario would be if somehow we could do that together.
Turning first to our special contributor, Larry Summers of Harvard. So, Larry, this week we heard about the tentative agreement for 90 days at least between the United States and China dialing back on the tariffs. Was this a step forward for the Trump administration?
I salute Secretary Bessent. The avoidance of value subtracted is value added. And by that standard, we added value. The United States backed off of what were extremely imprudent and potentially economically very damaging prohibitive tariffs to the point of embargo on China. That was a good thing for the U.S. economy. And as a consequence, the U.S. stock market rose substantially in recognition of that. It was not an increase due to Chinese concessions. You could see that from the internals of the market. Companies like toy companies that were dependent on imports, retailers performed particularly well. But look, when you make a mistake, when you've done something imprudent, it's a good idea to salvage what pride you can and to retreat. And that's what the Trump administration did. And I salute Secretary Bessent for his leadership in doing that.
Part of any high-stakes negotiation is trying to assess the pressure points on the two sides. And one of the things we've heard from President Trump is he believes there's a lot of pressure on China right now because it is a manufacturing economy. And as he says, a lot of factories have gone quiet. Is he right? Is there a lot of pressure on China right now to come to terms?
I think there's some pressure on China, but I think there's more pressure on us because we're the one that's a democratic country that's responsive to our people. We're the one that has a highly inflation-conscious population, and prohibitive tariffs raise price levels. We're the one that's the active player here. So I think there was a lot of pressure on us, to which we responded. I think it's a very important part of governing to be willing to recognize when you've pushed things too far and to pull back. But let's not be confused about what the path here was. It was an overly aggressive, overly truculent, erroneous approach from which there has been a significant but still not total retreat.
Larry, take a step back from the particulars of balance of trade and fairness in trade. As a macroeconomist, we do have the second largest economy in the world, by most measures, by some even the largest economy in the world, that is not market-driven fundamentally. It is centrally planned, and they've built up a huge productive capacity. How does one deal with that? I don't think we ever had to do that in the past. How do you deal with that in terms of trade terms and making sure that it doesn't distort things in our country?
Well, I think what you do is you focus on your own economic interests. And if others want to subsidize your consumers, if others want to subsidize your producers, that can very easily be a good thing. And so you try to define what your core interests are. We have a core interest in national security, and in everything that's national security sensitive, we need to be trying to pivot away from China. We need to be very attentive to the security risks of Chinese presence in the United States. That's issues like TikTok. We need to be very focused on preventing China from getting access to intellectual property in ways that's going to enable them to surpass us. But you have to focus on your core interests. And when you're worried about the export of Barbie dolls, you're not focusing on your core interests. When you're worried about trying to get jobs here, putting together the different components of an iPhone, you're not worried about your core interests. So yeah, we do need a strategy with respect to China, a strategy directed at getting them to follow rules of the road where that's important for our core national security interests. But this kind of broad, indiscriminate attack that has been launched that mostly serves to cause Americans to feel poorer, mostly serves to increase our inflation, that's not the right way forward. So I'm glad to see the adjustments that the Trump administration has entered into.
The tentative agreement reached in Geneva was just that, tentative, leaving a lot of work to be done before the United States and China can reach a long-term solution to their trade conflicts. Elizabeth Economy is a China expert at the Hoover Institution who keeps careful track of the relative strengths and weaknesses of the world's two largest economies.
I think both countries have economic vulnerabilities. I think the assessment on the part of the Trump administration was that China was more vulnerable because it exports much more to the United States than the U.S. does to China. Its economy has also been struggling. It's been in a prolonged economic slowdown for at least 3 years now. But I think there was a fundamental miscalculation on the part of the administration. They didn't appreciate that we have a much greater sort of sole or near sole source reliance on a number of critical products from China. Critical minerals, rare earth elements, active pharmaceutical ingredients. These are all things that are essential for our economic security, our national security, our human security, and will devastate, quite frankly, our pharmaceutical industries and our defense and technology industries. So there's a balance, I think, between the Chinese vulnerabilities and the U.S. vulnerabilities. Both of us, I think, have serious vulnerabilities in the space of this tariff war.
Does the rest of the world give one side, between the United States and China, an advantage over the other? I mean, both sides historically have tried to recruit the rest of the world.
I think for the advanced market democracies, what we've seen has been, in some respects, somewhat surprising. I think there was a belief on the part of the Chinese government that given this tariff war, this global tariff war that President Trump has launched, that it would be easy pickings, that China would walk in and basically say, we are a stabilizing force in the global economy, we're a stabilizing force in the international system, and they've gone around saying, let's join hands and work together to push back against President Trump and this tariff war. I think what they found is that really nobody's that interested in buying what they're selling. There's an entire world now emerging that is set to support the current rules-based order that doesn't include the United States, but also doesn't include China.
One destination of Chinese goods that otherwise might be exported would be domestically, increased domestic consumption, which has been talked about for years now. What are the prospects that, in fact, Xi Jinping might say, okay, we're going to stimulate the consumer?
I mean, Chinese economists have been saying for years now that the government needs to do more to support the consumer economy. And part of that would be, investing more in the healthcare system, the education system, the pension system, giving the Chinese people a sense that they don't need to continue to save in the case of an emergency. But Xi Jinping is allergic to what he calls social welfareism. He doesn't want to give the Chinese people any incentive not to work. At least that's how he looks at it. So again, we've seen President Xi over the course of this tariff war take a few steps, in the form of raising wages for civil servants, notwithstanding the fact that a year ago or a year and a half ago, he actually cut those same wages. So I don't know whether this is actual increase or it's just taking them back to where they were. And also, again, having this massive goods trade-in program. But mostly what he's done, I think, is encourage banks to loan to small and medium-sized enterprises. You've seen Alibaba, for example, reduce the cost of companies putting their goods on its platform to encourage small and medium-sized enterprises to be able to export. So there are steps that are being taken, but there's nothing in the way of sort of a massive boost to the consumer economy that I think Chinese economists would like to see.